With me today is a very special friend and fellow traveler of the spiritual journey, Tawni. Tawni, thanks so much for keeping me company today. Welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here with you, Brent.
So, Tawni, I'll introduce you to our audience briefly, and then we'll just jump right into you sharing about your journey. So, Tawni and I were connected on the When Lightning Strikes community, and immediately in one of the Zoom talks, the Zoom sharing circles that we had, I recognized Tawni and her radiance. And Tawni, what I would describe, the essence of what you were sharing and what you share in the community and in our conversations, I would say that it's a gentle, soothing wisdom.
Hmm.
And, I don't feel that from everybody. Everybody's got their own flavor of wisdom and insight. But from you, I feel this gentle and soothing wisdom, and it's palpable. And one thing that really jumped out to me was, sometimes on the forum, on the chat, sometimes you'll sign off your messages with aloha and you'll put a little emoji of a flower. And that would always genuinely hit me in the chest when I would read that, like an aloha, like a nice wave of aloha, of that. It's good vibes. And I'm intuitive and I can pick up on intuitive energy as an empath. And I'm sure you're familiar, it transcends limitations. You can see it through a text message, an email, a video call, of course, in person as well. And so I always feel a genuine infusion of aloha when you say that. And I could tell you're not just typing it. It's something you're really sending out. And I could feel that. And I want, to have you on the podcast today to share your aloha with our audience. I know they're going to benefit from it. I know they're going to benefit from your soothing, gentle wisdom. And so, Tawni, today you're coming to us from Hawaii. I'm a little jealous. You're in the home that you designed, which is pretty fascinating. And you can see in the background there are a lot of uh, beautiful, bright, well-lit space. Maybe we'll chat a little bit about that as we go and you share your story. But overall, Tawni, you're here to talk about with me Kundalini awakening, my favorite topic of all time. The audience, of course, is interested in hearing about, the uniqueness of your Kundalini awakening journey, some of the challenges you face, some of the solutions you found, the ups and downs. Maybe there's some dark night of the soul, maybe there's some profound, liberating, mystical experiences. Let's just get right into all of that. Why don't you take us back to, as early as you'd like, when the spiritual inclination and interest began to emerge in you? How did it all begin?
Um, okay, well, my story is a little bit different in the sense that it had a beginning. Uh, I felt like I was born with this impulse. It was not later that I found out that everybody didn't have this. For me, um, our experience is so subjective that we actually don't realize everybody's different until we move on a little bit and people talk to us about theirs. um, so I grew up on a farm in North Dakota, in the Midwest, for the first 12 years of my life. um, I was kind of that girl who was looking down the road, through a window, like feeling inside, why isn't anybody talking to me about these things that I sense or I feel, or the unseen. There was just sort of this longing to connect and communicate about, deeper matters. I mean, I'm talking like, 6 old, and just um, feeling there was so much more that wasn't said. It's kind of progressed my whole life, to be honest, to find people who can speak a language that really touches me and my heart, and can help me make sense of what's happening here. So, I grew up in a place, in my family. They weren't very connected to me. I spent a lot of time alone. Um, my dad was like a narcissistic figure. My mom was a very loving woman, but she was pretty detached and doing her own thing. on a farm, everybody's really literally out in the field. So my brother was there. My sister kind of had a disliking from me from the very beginning, just never wanted to play with me or affirm I existed, or so that I guess what I'm saying is I had a lot of wounds very, very early. There was sexual abuse, a lot of things that, I don't look at them as wrong things, but they were just things that I later had to deal with and unpack. And it was way much later because I didn't actually know that there was a lot of emotional trauma that was going to need to, be dealt with. But what I did know that was the thread to the present day was this desire and this disordered eating. I my little protector parts found something for me to do to survive, to handle the pain and the loneliness. I was alone a really, really lot. And there was some pleasure there and all that stuff. And that was a theme. I mean, that was a huge teacher for me for decades to sort that out. It got all convoluted into God and why I wasn't able to beat this thing, even though I tried so very, very hard. And, as I grew, like going to counseling and even leading my own groups and flying all over and check myself into an inpatient treatment center. And I honestly didn't know what was wrong with me because I liked my life. I loved being a mom. I have 4 children and had them all at home. And that was a really beautiful experience. And I had a very peaceful home. So I really didn't know. I didn't know. I pretty much, kept praying and asking God, like, why and what and how what can I do? And I resigned myself to there's nothing I can do. And my love for God and my devotion for God was really strong from a little one. I would write songs to God. And also when I started going to church, and doing, I really loved Jesus. I really had an affinity to Jesus as well. And yet I didn't find the power to move away from that, right? So it was really troubling to me because I thought my sin could separate me from God. I thought, and that was like unbearable to me. It broke my heart to think that is what I learned in church. I found out it's not true, but so I didn't want to be a hypocrite. Eventually, I just didn't want, and I didn't feel like I was a good representative of God, of Jesus, of the love I knew inside, because I had issues raised. I had this addiction. And so it was really troubling to me, to the point that I decided to not play music, to not do anything, really to just not represent God and not do that, because like I said, I didn't want to represent the light in a way that wasn't true. So one of the pivotal things for me that happened at that point, I was on Kauai where I lived, and I was at the beach, and my longing in my heart was just so despair. And I was just, like, and I said, God, if I never change, can you still use me? Like, is there any way, that I can live in this skin the way I am and still be with you? And, one doesn't like to say, yeah, I heard God's voice, but I heard God's voice. And God told me yes. He told me that he did not run on the same track as do good, get good. He ran on a completely different track in a completely different realm. And what I came across, what happened to me is, in that second, the trauma that church had taught me, the God, my sin could separate me, it got healed in an instant. And in my heart, I knew the unconditionalness of God and that nothing could separate me from that. And the immediate joy and the weight and the burden, like lifted from me, like you wouldn't believe, like very, very heavy backpack. And I understood one of the foundational spiritual truths that I understand still today. It has never like left this joy of the Lord, that the grace that he gave me, and so that was actually a big awakening for me. That was a big awakening.
How old were you?
I was about 25 at this point.
Right, right. And, so far you're sharing a lot that I can relate with. As a young kid, I also had this intense sort of, I guess at the time I would call it a religious inclination. I thought, I would be a religious person for my whole life. And even around me in Catholic school, my other friends weren't really as interested as I was. And I went to Catholic school. And so I also really had a strong love for Jesus and a great admiration for Jesus. But when I began to find, the contradiction between, us being sinners and then God also loves us unconditionally and this sort of thing, it was very, very troubling for me. And I became angry and enraged and that sort of thing. After you had this experience where God showed you, like you described, he runs on a different track. There's unconditional love there. Did you feel a sort of resentment towards the church and towards religion in that way?
I didn't recognize that I did then. I recognize in myself now the injustice of the whole thing and how we got the whole thing wrong. And I feel a fierce, ferocious part of me that wants to make that right, to anybody who would have been stuck where I was.
Yeah.
And, yeah, I feel that with the church right now because I also was in a Christian cult church. And there's a lot of pain that happens in church, to be honest, in my opinion. I think that's made a lot of facades. People wear a lot of facades just because their basic doctrine, holds perfection of the human form. And that we have to get there ourselves, and I don't believe that was the message Jesus came to deliver,
Right, right. So I don't want to derail our conversation too much. I still would, love to hear you
No
continue on
problem.
with your story, but you raise an interesting point. It's something that I've been thinking about recently, the idea of perfection. And there's some ideas that this idea of self-realization or enlightenment being a perfected being is actually like a Judeo-Christian imposition on the Eastern ideas. And that's why, today we have people that may claim I'm perfect, and then behind the scenes they're, taking advantage of people. Or we have people that are aspiring for perfection and have had maybe very significant awakening, self-realization, enlightenment, but are still wondering, why am I still a flawed human being? I need to get perfect. And it's like these two completely separate systems kind of blending together in a sort of unhealthy way. Have you experienced this? Did you experience this, like this sort of clashing between total acceptance of yourself as you are and then also this idea of like, oh, well, I have to be perfect?
Yeah, definitely. Being a Virgo, we're like kind of the most self-critical little sign. And I think that for me personally, differentiating between my desire to do the best I can, because I have a high standard that I set for myself, because I just know I can, like I like to keep a clean house because I know I can. I like to be really organized in things because that makes me feel grounded. Different things like that, differentiating between that and actually my trauma wound that makes me want to cover it up with a certain perfection on the outside. Like if I look good, if my house is in order, if I seem good, then I might not get rejected, or I won't have to deal with the pain of other people's judgments.
Right.
And my own, high standard. But I I was trying to figure this out myself. Throwing the baby out with the bathwater didn't seem well, because I actually knew that God gave me a personality and he wants to work within this structure, right? And some of those things that I want to do are not like part of my wound. That's just part of my personality. But I recognize other things, other ways. Like if it's just intolerable that my house is out of order, I pause and I go, okay, all right, let's unpack me a bit here and what's going on. But I think that was my original question to God. Like, okay, I really realized I'm not perfect here. What do we do with this? Can I love you? Can you love me? Can I move on in the things that are my heart's desire? Or should I just hang it up? And so that was huge. It was really huge. I mean, the emotional feeling that I felt. I mean, I went home and I got all my music and my pianos and I immediately wrote a song to God, and I haven't stopped. It just like, I go, okay, and the first line was, "Blessed be the Lord, for he has heard me."
Oh, that's really beautiful. Yeah, that's really beautiful. It's a huge thing to overcome, which is, the idea that I need to be perfect. I mean, what worse standard can we put ourselves under? Like, what worse pressure than the need to be absolutely perfect? And when you have a deep love and wanting to be in a relationship with God, in every waking moment, you may be feeling, flawed. Whereas maybe somebody else recognizes, hey, I'm not perfect, but I don't really have too much of a concern with a relationship with God who needs me to be perfect. So then they can be flawed and it's okay. But to
Mhm.
combine these two, the desire to be with the God who you think needs you to be perfect, oh, that's a lot of pressure. And I can feel the relief, the way you describe your story there, the relief that, came forth, and the music you're writing, and it's that's an incredible release. Um, so after that, now you mentioned the Christian cult. Was this before that experience or was it afterwards?
Um, this was around that same time. But after that moment, like, peace in the Bible. Like I used to be a Bible teacher, and teach from the Bible. But what I was teaching was the religion God was teaching me. It had really nothing to do. I mean, it was biblical and scriptural based, but it was what was now running through my heart. It was a religion of my own. It was different. And like the word peace means the enmity between God and man has been abolished. And like I remember writing a little teaching on the gospel of peace, what really was given as a free gift, this grace. And but yeah, the Christian cult was hard, for sure, because as I was visible, I was always playing worship and teaching and doing a lot of things, because I'm a really service oriented person as well. And but what I started to see is God started to just show me the control that was happening here. And with the pastor controlling everyone, and when he started to control my life, my personal life, I just saw it right really clearly, and spoke to him that I didn't think that I could follow this direction, for me. I didn't think I was going to get kicked out of the church, but that's what happened. you know um so I I had to walk out of that church. And this was actually the fourth church that I had gone to, Christian churches. And I thought that it was just that particular church, but I realized it was actually the doctrine and the foundation from which the whole religious structure came that I couldn't fit into. It wasn't my truth any longer. And so within a week was pretty much being I wasn't following the pastor's orders. I kind of got my packing slip, which if you understand that my whole life was God and the church and music and teaching, and all my friends were there, that hit me pretty hard. I didn't really have any friends after that, and because no one could stand up to the pastor. So that was a really hard time for me. And when I walked out of the church the last time, I said, Jesus, I'm not sure you're going to follow me out, but if you don't, then I guess I got that wrong too. And then I walked away, right? I no longer read the Bible. All I did, my prayer at that point was, I don't care what the truth is. I just want to know it.
Fascinating. Yes. This sounds to me like the life of a mystic, right? Somebody having genuine experience, genuine lived direct experience. And for the mystic, religion often is it becomes very limiting and you outgrow it very quickly. And it sounds to me now you're asking, for the truth, and that sounds like self-inquiry to me, right? And those it's like the practice that we see in Zen, right? Working with koans or Advaita Vedanta, self-inquiry, looking for the truth, right? The ultimate truth. Yeah.
I I couldn't have made that impulse run through me. It just did. Yeah. And so as I left the church, it wasn't but 6 months later, and I realized that Jesus was still in my heart. Okay, that was big. I felt presence. I felt when I was in a heap on the floor because of the big cut that had just happened to me. I had children, I had to get to school and stuff, but I often couldn't function well while I was dealing with that trauma and my whole belief system not really having much to stand on any longer. So I was really free flowing in the spirit department. But I remember that one day after I got the kids to school, I was just sitting there. I was on the floor. I just put some music in and I couldn't move. And I felt this most beautiful warmth and light come down on me and circle me like a bubble and just held me there in the most loving, tender space. And that would happen, during that time where I was really not knowing, but the presence was there and with me. I did know that. And it helped me to keep going, right? So about 6 months later, I was at my friend's house and she was having some people over. I had gotten interested in astrology, being I was out of the church now. I'm basically I'm Aquarian. I have so much Aquarian energy in me, and I kind of just go, whoa, freedom. There's part of me is going, freedom from all these limitations, and you can't do this and you can't do that. And astrology seemed like a demonic thing from the church's point of view. But I was interested in it, and I started to, to get into it. At this party was a person who someone told me was really into astrology and a new system that's in our normal regular deck of cards. And so I went up to him and asked him if he'd give me a reading. And he said, no, I don't do that anymore. And I said, oh, okay, well, I respect that. And he called me next day and he said, God told me to teach the teachers. So he presented a reading to me, and we're talking a reading that at that time it was cassette tapes. He gave me 8 cassette tapes and a 3-ring binder that was 2 inches on me.
Wow.
Basically, what he was doing was teaching me this system through teaching me who I was in this system, which is actually the way I teach it to people now, too, as well. You know, and at that same time, he sat me down and he said, what is one thing that everybody can agree on? Religious, non-religious, everybody can agree on. And I didn't know. And I didn't know he was a spiritual teacher and didn't know where he's going with it. And he said that you exist, that I exist. And he proceeded to talk to me and introduce me to this man who is really my spiritual teacher and father, not alive anymore. And set me free. It's kind of like my second awakening by this man. He, I had this real issue with free will and God's will, my will, what's going on here, because my personal experience is I really didn't have much of it. I mean, I noticed I could put my best foot forward and sometimes it would hit the mark. Sometimes it wouldn't hit the mark. I knew for sure that I had exhausted my ability to deal with this disordered eating, to this need to, didn't know the words at that time, but basically it was my mind, my psyche protecting me from all these suppressed emotions. And it was giving me a focus, up front. And I didn't realize that was happening because this stuff hadn't been dealt with. So of course, this is still going to be happening. But I learned my sadhana that way. I learned I wasn't in charge. I learned that as much passion and power that I felt like I had, and that, I saw that I could really conquer a lot of things, but not this. And this person and my teacher started to explain some of these existential questions that I had in a way that met my heart's longing, my questions. They might not be everybody's questions. It was what I came in needing to know. If it's some God and some me, then where's the line? Okay. What's my part? What's God's part? It just didn't make sense to me. But when I understood that all there was consciousness, all there was God, and that God was doing everything, the whole thing. He was, he wrote, directed, acted, and even witnessed this whole play of consciousness down here. And for some reason, I had no issue with that. I think God had been preparing a foundation to receive this teaching and this truth a lot of years through failure.
Right. Through failure. Yes. Yeah, that's when the surrender comes, right? We talk about surrender a lot on the spiritual path. I talk about it. Sometimes people ask me, how do I surrender? And I can, give some metaphors and stuff, but the real truth is it happens when your will is exhausted. And that often is, through failure. You have to get up and fall down a few times until it's really burned out. And I think even surrender is an ongoing process. It happens in layers and layers and layers, and there's always a deeper level. Yeah, it's a dance between pretending as if you're doing things and then remembering that you're not, and back and forth, and it's a fun dance.
Yeah, I feel that way as well. For me, because this kind of landed in me around the year 2000. It's been quite a while now. And the teachings kind of deepened in me that it's not too big of a gap between maybe a resistance to something that is, and the understanding coming out in action and going, oh, but this isn't up to me. This is like, thy will be done, God. And that more automatic surrender is, it's kind of there. Do you know what I mean? That doesn't mean that I don't like it at all, that I might not like what's happening. I just don't have much argument with it. I can't muster up someone this shouldn't be in me, because I know I don't know the mysteries of God. I don't know what's best for me. And it's very powerful, this knowing, for me, to live life like this, because my peace isn't interrupted that much then. And for me, that's what I have always wanted. I didn't really consider myself much of a seeker, because I always felt like I had God. But if there was a seeking, it was, how do I live in my own skin? How do I face life day to day and not run from it? That's what I really wanted. And understanding that whatever was happening through me was God's will, even if it expressed in an eating disorder at that moment. This is sort of my second biggest weight that dropped, like the guilt and the blame on myself. But it didn't just stop there. It stopped, well, if I am allowed this, then my brother is also. My brother's not doing it. And I started to not be able to find anything wrong with his actions that even hurt me. That doesn't mean I was perfect and I didn't get angry, but my natural eyes saw that person hurt me. My third eye, or my inner knowing, knew nobody could ever hurt me. This was all God's gig. And so that kept me pretty balanced on a certain foundational way. And the eating stuff started to really get healed from that truth. I didn't realize the power. I guess at that point, there's just a big acceptance of a lot of things, just how life worked, how they do it, how I do it. It just wasn't the main thing. I just kind of let it alone and let God take care of it at that point. I just really didn't care much anymore. It was just like, well, God created it. He's going to have to fix it if he wants to. If not, yeah, I can still love, I can still go on. And because I felt, along with this devotion to God, I felt just a lot of love most of my life. So there was that beautiful teaching, foundational for me. And the same person who gave me an astrology reading said, it might be nice for you to go to the ashram in Berkeley and go to a, intensive. And I thought, oh, okay, why not? So, little island girl goes to the city and makes her way to this big auditorium where I was going to go to a chanting intensive for 48 hours with Guru Mai. Which I did. Second day, was standing there, chanting, all new to me, and yet I was just enjoy. I thought, wow, these people are worshiping like I used to worship God. They're just doing it different. And really, first time I ever seen that, And on the ceiling there was a picture of a black and white photo of Muktananda hanging from these big chains, which was her guru, Muktananda. And I was chanting, and I looked up, and that man's energy, he was alive, and he just jumped into me. This felt like literally, and that energy released the energy inside me, and from the base of my spine just danced me, just like, and my body was just swaying and being danced. And I could feel where it was, and I felt it everywhere up, and I felt it leave my head. And yet I was still dancing with it. It never really left. And like my feet started to do like they move like the happy dance, and I was totally electrified. And I, wow, I just knew that this is unmistakable. This was a really something. And there's no pain in it, no nothing. It was just like, wow, what an experience this is, you know. And I intuitively knew that if I looked at my neighbor, like I'd blow his light sockets out. I mean, I was that. And I kind of kept my head down and this huge grin on my face, just like, oh my goodness. And rode the cable card home, and I got to my hotel room, and I just laughed. I was just in ecstatic joy, like you might see a whirling dervish, moo. I just was just like, because all this God stuff that I'd cared about my whole life. And I felt the presence of God many times in music and stuff. And yet this was through my body and up and in, and this was a whole different thing. And it was just such a confirmation to me that this was alive and this was real, that it made me just really laugh and be happy and joyful. And after that, it just broke me, Then I cried for really a long time. I don't know why. I just did. I just cried. And
sorry, when you say a long time, are you talking hours or days,
yeah,
weeks? Hours.
yeah, no, just hours, just hours. And then I went to sleep, and I only told one person, the person who suggested I go there. And I went back to my life. I didn't know. I didn't know. I should research this, see what this is all about. It just was like, okay, that was a happening, and that was amazing. And I went back to my life, and my life completely changed. And I could feel that I was interested in different things. That the teachings that I had learned from this guru in India, these teachings, they just started to explode all over in my head, and I understood things. I understood even more what was going on down here, and how I fit in, what was the picture. And I really had a lot of joy. My outside world changed. I like completely got a divorce, moved off of this beautiful island I liked because I knew I needed to. And I think this is maybe where I differ with the Kundalini experience, that, okay, Kundalini happened and then life changed, and then all this other stuff, the dark night happened and all that. That wasn't my experience. My experience was God always was. God was always doing this whole show with me, and this was another thing he did. And then as my life progressed on, it was just a continuation of that. It didn't differentiate between Shakti, Shiva, any of those things. I just knew I wasn't in charge, and it was happening through me. Life was doing this, and there was an ability to just go with that flow for some reason.
Incredible. Yes, that's a major theme that I've been sort of exploring within myself recently, is that we don't all have to make this a big deal in terms of like, we can just surrender to it like an innocent child. Yeah, this is what's happening. And then we just move on with it in terms of, we don't have to become obsessive about it. And I really love that you said, you didn't necessarily, go into an intense dark night of the soul. Your journey just continued. And that's one of the main intentions that I have for this podcast, is to show people that, this journey can look very different. And for somebody like you, it doesn't have to be a huge, this word Kundalini doesn't have to be a huge theme per se. It's all God. Right? And you can look at it through so many different lenses. So thank you for sharing that zoomed out perspective of the unfolding so far.
Well, yeah, and thank you for like even realizing that it doesn't fit a box, and being open-minded and expansive to see, hey, you can't really put spirit in a box, and yeah, so I found that this whole process just was quite mystical. Life was quite mystical, living with, people might say Kundalini, or I might say God. It, I didn't, I felt like when I would get into sticky situations, the thing that held me and was, there all the time was, oh, okay, this is God's gig. This is God's gig. This is just something that I'm going to just have to surrender to. The inevitable surrender was pretty quite immediate. It really was. And I'm not saying I'm great. I'm not saying that I didn't go through all of the processes, the emotional things that happened because of it. I certainly did. But again, the argument, so the psychological self was weakening. The egoic idea of myself being in charge was weakening. My thoughts, my plans, my opinions, my ideas, my perceptions, they just didn't seem like they were really going to fly too far. I knew there was something stronger than those, right?
And so I was just going to ask, as this sort of dissolution of yourself and these beliefs was happening, did you conceive of it in a certain way, as if, that energetic experience that I had in California is now like, transforming me? Is that the way you were looking at it? Or was it all just, is it just happening and something is happening?
It was God was transforming me. I mean, transformation was huge. And it was most of the time in my life, not gentle.
Mm-hmm.
Quick, sharp, going 180 degrees the other way. So it took me down and down and down until I just realized that, okay, there's just a humbleness that came on board with life, I guess.
So take us a little further now. So you've had these experiences. Can you give us a general timeline of the sort of dissolution process? Was it, can you pinpoint a general timeline or part of your life that this was happening before things shifted again?
This is from the Kundalini awakening till present day. The psychological self has been thinning. The veil of that illusion has gotten thinner.
Right.
And so, that's a good, 20 years, right? Something like that. But I wanted to back up a little, just and share another kind of major awakening that happened to me when I went to a silent retreat in Yosemite. And I remember speaking to you that right before that, I was in Mount Shasta and in a coffee shop, and I saw the picture of this old man, and I just was mesmerized by it. And I left it and I kept walking back to it and just was drawn into this man's eyes, and still am today, drawn into this man's eyes. That is the representation. What I see in his eyes is a representation of that to me. And so I didn't know who this was, but eventually I just bought the picture, right? So then I proceeded to this 10-day silent retreat in Yosemite with this woman spiritual teacher. And I noticed in her little bookstore this man was. The picture, this man was there. A book about this man was there. It was Ramana, and I go, oh, wow. And I realized that she was in the lineage of Ramana. And I go, wow, okay, so another divine guidance, right? You don't know why you resonate and why you need to have this picture and why, I look at it right now and the light, and
Yeah, I invite anybody out there who's not familiar with Ramana to not even necessarily look up his, work or biography. Just look up a picture there. Yeah. It's there's an innocence and a radiance and the self shines through. And I've come across many people who have a similar relationship with Ramana when they don't even really know much, but they know there's something about this guy. I think well, not I think my dad has the same birthday as Ramana.
oh.
And he thought that was amazing, it's just another really reason to feel this connection and be in the company of Ramana. Just it's something very, very special with multiple of these, enlightened people. Technology isn't a limitation for the self or the Shakti or that divine presence to shine through. Photos, videos, even a text. I heard one talk about somebody who was he hitched a ride with somebody and they had a picture of Neem Karoli Baba, Ram Dass's guru. And he just said, who is that guy in that picture? Who's that, fat old Indian guy? Because he saw it and he started to cry. And
Oh.
and he didn't know, he's like, who is this guy? Right. And so it's interesting the power that exists in those who have tasted the self, you could say. And we all radiate to some degree or another. We all do. And I like to think of, if I have some impact, if I leave something behind, I'd like to think maybe even a small percentile of Shakti can radiate outwards long after I'm gone, even if it's just a fraction. Then I've done my work. But of course, there are giants like Ramana and Neem Karoli Baba who continue to do their work through photos and dreams and all these sorts of things. It's really fascinating stuff. That is the power of of the divine when the divine begins to flow through a person. But anyway, I digress.
No,
Thank you for
no,
sharing that. I love Ramana. I really do.
yeah, like the power of the transmission, like that picture of Muktananda. That was a photo, man. But
So
it had power to awaken something dormant inside me up.
yeah, Muktananda was a special, interesting guy. He did definitely have a lot of that Shakti, and he
Yeah.
had that skill to transmit Shakti, that gift of Shaktipad. And like we were saying, even a photo is not it's not out of the realm of possibilities for even a photo to transmit that. I'm curious if you, moving forward after that experience, it's maybe some point along your way, did you have some sort of relationship or interest in Muktananda and his work? Okay, yeah, that's interesting because I was
Yeah.
reading a little bit about Muktananda and some allegations. I discovered some allegations about sexual abuse and just disgusting, horrible things. And this was only a couple of weeks ago, and I mean, I could if I really got into it, I could cry now. Like it's absolutely heartbreaking
Yeah.
to I felt betrayed, because
Mhm.
I've also recognized great power in Muktananda and the spiritual accomplishment. And yet then there are also these, these allegations and this abuse, and it's very difficult to process. I'm still trying to, make sense of it. From what I've understood so far, it's like we were saying before, nobody's perfect. And that's not to justify what he did. That's wrong. And
I'm
he
hearing
shouldn't,
you.
but
Yeah.
this idea, yeah, go ahead.
there's these latent powers, within us. And, as we'll talk about, I had to face mine as well, at a certain point. But I think that, we just have to recognize that the power of God can flow through an individual of and their body, mind, and their human side is not developed. But God shows that. You even look at the Bible, and a lot of, King David, he was a murderer, adulterer, he ended up being, the king of Israel. And David and God called him the man after God's own heart, to reconcile the perfect lies within perfect people. The extraordinary lies within the ordinary human, and
Right.
to have that grace for ourselves and another, I really think is sort of why, just like Nisargadatta, angry man who smokes cigarettes, right?
Yeah.
Did that lessen his teaching? I don't know. It still got to me.
Hmm. Yeah, I completely agree. I think what I've come to conclude is that the teacher should be forthcoming that they are imperfect,
Yes.
and the students should also recognize that, because what
Yes.
was happening, at least from what I read briefly, was that, he was, Muktananda was teaching about celibacy and preservation of sexuality and all that sort of stuff, brahmachari and all that stuff. But then behind closed doors, he was, raping women. And the women thought, well, this can't be sexual and this can't be rape because he's beyond sexuality, and this idea of he's perfect. So this must be something spiritual that I don't understand. And that
Read.
was the I guess, whether it was intentional or not, but that was the manipulation tactic that worked for him to be able to abuse. It sort of, created this spiritually bypassing loop where, anything goes. And that's why I think it's so important that, at least moving forward, if you understand this, we have to talk about what you just said. God may be able to come through, but this body, this mind is imperfect, and we are works in progress. We're still healing, still growing, and nobody is beyond making mistakes. And when we make mistakes, just like anybody else, we should be, held accountable, and we should be honest and ask for forgiveness and do our best to, not harm others. Nisargadatta, like you said, he smoked cigarettes. Okay, that's fine. I mean, maybe it's a human imperfection. It had mostly to do with his own system, but we all have some flaws. Some of us, like Muktananda, maybe had some sexual hangups and some sort of, narcissistic tendencies or whatever it was that led to that type of abuse. But, it makes me wonder, what are my tendencies? Maybe I have subtle ways that I, maybe am offensive or rude or manipulative that I'm not even aware of. And then maybe
Yeah.
I'm somehow spiritually bypassing that. This experience that I had, like when I read about Muktananda recently, like I said, it really was like eye-opening for me, because I recognized, the work does not stop, can never get complacent.
No, I haven't found that there's not pockets that, poke their head up of everyday living that I have to trace down to something that I didn't see, or a wound, or an emotion that wasn't faced or felt. And I think humility, uh, humility is just a really awesome trait to see in another. And I think before every major big move, there's a humble being there who is, that was the first step that they had to take, to, to truly allow God to move through them in an authentic way, not in a facade, like I'll teach you this and I'll do another thing, you know. But what I was going to say is I went to this retreat, and it was really, really quite beautiful. But what happened to me one night was another, I would say it's like this third awakening experience that I had it was more of a unitive experience of the complete circle oneness. And I just couldn't sleep, and I just started to write, and this energy started to come on me, and just all I could do. I still have these 11 pages of a legal binder that I was writing, and I kept drawing this circle, just drawing this circle. And it was like I was writing, everything in my life has come down to this very moment of understanding this oneness. And I went on and said so much stuff, but what I understood at that moment, that this oneness was so big, it just like, and it came back around and it grabbed me too. And I realized that I was part of this, that that's when I really understood that I was consciousness as well, that I was this. And that stunned me silent. I mean, I was at a silent retreat that worked perfectly, but I would sit for hours between sessions and just look out the window at this little light snow falling on the evergreen trees. And I just couldn't care to move at all. I just felt this wholeness. And yeah, that was big. That was really big. And none of this was like conceptual. Religion was conceptual. This was experiential. This was happenings. I mean, I couldn't sleep. I'd get up and I'd have to draw the circle again. And I mean, it was just so alive in me. And then it all just dropped, and there was just peace, like the snow falling. And so I was pretty bright after that happening. And then life happened. Life just kept happening. It was a very expansive time for me. I got into designing homes and that career, and having a lot of architects and draftspeople work for me, and designing homes and loving being in people's lives. They tell me they wanted a 2-story, whatever, and this, and I just get so excited, and because there's a lot of creativity that wanted to express, and that was a beautiful avenue for me to express, to be in people's lives. And yeah, so it did that. Then I had another career. I had a healthcare center in the town that I live in, because I did a cleanse, a colon hydrotherapy cleanse, and felt a lot of transformational stuff happen on all levels of being, psychological, emotional, physical, spiritual. And I decided I wanted to do this because I'd always had the desire to be really in people's lives in a significant, meaningful, deep, personal way. I just loved human nature, and I felt a lot of compassion, love for people. But more than just like seeing people at the mailbox, like I know I could go deeper with people, and I really wanted to. And I could see this was a way. So I went and got trained and did that and opened up a center, and it was really cool. It was really beautiful because I ended up being with a lot of people who had gone through the medical system, and they were still sick, and so they were trying alternative methods. So I got to be with hard, sad people, and I got to be with them and love them and provide what I could for them and take them through cleanses and different things, right, with the colon hydrotherapy. And so that was cool. Life went on. I got remarried to a really nice man, the one I'm married to today, and we've been married for 20 years. And but I think I'm going to fast forward right now to 2018, where really the shit hit the fan for me.
Mm-hmm.
Like big. And the volcano had just erupted, which was very traumatic because I was in our houses, and everything that we owned was in the line that it could flow and take it all away. we had to leave our house. So that was pretty nerve-wracking, to say the least. My nervous system, just shot to fight and flight and stayed there for months and months. It was a very long, active volcano. Devastated this side of the islands and took many, many, many homes, like 700 homes and everything. That I had an injury on my rib that wouldn't go back in, and it was really painful for 3 months, and I couldn't, it just wouldn't do it. It was very painful, and chiropractors couldn't seem to deal with it. My husband and I were stressed in our ways of handling all the stress. We weren't handling it like so much on a team. We were both, it was triggering all of our stuff, right? So that was sad for me. And I laid down for a nap one day, and this is when, Brent, I woke up a different person. I woke up and I immediately knew something was wrong. It felt like part of my brain was gone. My nervous system was not regulating anything. There was no sense of well-being. I had zero energy. I could hardly move. I didn't know what happened. All I just knew that it encompassed everything, and it felt torturous, literally just torturous. I didn't associate it with Kundalini because, like I said, I kind of just saw this all as a move of God, right? And it was doing quite well. It wasn't that I wasn't facing life or emotions. It was just, I just knew it was all God, right? Kind of did that, but not avoiding myself. I didn't know that I was avoiding, stuff. But yeah, so that was really big. And this started the dark night of the soul that lasted 2.5 years. I mean, 2.5 years with not a break, like with no break in the wall. Not, I had a good day and then I didn't have a good day. There were moments. All that was coming up was the energy of the universe was rushing through me. Unbelievable anxiety, like unbelievable. Like nothing could be enjoyed because I felt like I was just gonna leave my skin or my body, and I shook a lot. It took all my energy. I'm a very neat, tidy person. I took a shower once every 10 days. It was overwhelming to think about taking a shower. I couldn't listen to music. I couldn't watch TV. I couldn't read. I mean, it was pretty encompassing, and there was a really lot of pain, and it felt like parts of me were completely gone. And on top of this, I was having memories and situations and scenarios and painful events show up in my life and dreams, and all this processing of stuff just rushed forward all the time. What didn't leave was my awareness of it all, or the awareness of it all. And I still felt love. I still felt love. I could feel it in myself, for others, even for myself. But every sense of myself was gone in any role that I identified with or thought I stood in or was. And I wasn't a proud person in my identities and roles. It's just that they all went out the window. I couldn't do anything, and I really didn't want to do it. It was really hard. It was really, really, really hard. By God's grace, a therapist landed in my lap, and COVID was here. She was offering her free services. I decided, wow, I don't know. I think my life is ending. And I felt like I wanted to tell one person everything in my life, all the dark stuff. I just wanted to unload. I felt this need to go back to the beginning, sort it through, and unload. And felt like my capacity to do that was about zero, but I knew I needed to do that. And she was willing to do that with me. And she's a beautiful woman. And she came to my house twice a week and we talked for 2 hours, and I snot nose cried and I revealed everything and did EMDR and just started to unpack stuff. I didn't know why I was doing this. Still hadn't figured out it was like a spiritual emergence, happening. But she had a small Kundalini experience. She goes, Tawni, I think you've got a Kundalini thing happening. I said, well, that did happen. But as we kind of got on, I go, oh my gosh. I started to see that this dark night stuff is sort of something else that happened with Kundalini. And so I started to look at that in that light, and it kind of made me feel, okay, well, maybe I'm not dying. Maybe there's a reason this is happening. And again, I was just going with the flow because there was no other flow to go with. I don't know if I can stop for a second and see. I kind of said a lot there if you want to say anything.
No, that's great. I would invite you to just keep going. Yeah.
Okay. So I also, because I looked up Kundalini now online, and I found Craig Holiday seemed to know a bit about this, and I resonated with his honesty, and where he was able to be human and express how hard it was for him. And it was everything that I was going through. And I go, wow, I really want to get in touch with this guy. I didn't know anything. I called him. He answered. When does that happen? And it became the beginning of a really long friendship. I think mentioned one time on a call, I said, I told him I don't really need a teacher. I just need a friend. Are you down for that? And so I talked to him every couple weeks for, a year, and then maybe once a month for a year. And he was just a sustaining person in my life. I look forward to those things. I felt like a kind of normal human being when I talked to him, because he was speaking my language and I didn't have anybody to speak that. And he's a very dear soul with a big heart.
Yes. No, definitely. Craig Holiday, very, very kind, sweet, evolved, and wise man for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. And when I got with him, I could feel my presence and God's presence. And that was the hardest part about the dark night, is even though I knew I needed to just trust this, it was complete blind faith. There was no more feeling of God. There was no more hearing God. There was no songs being played to God. And it was just really dark.
Mm-hmm.
And at that time, what helped me was friends. I didn't tell them, really what happened, but they would come over and play games with me or read to me or tell me their problems, to be honest. I was kind of a born counselor, maybe my love for human nature. And I could see into people and have a lot of compassion for them, and somehow knowing how to be with them, in hard times. And even when I was just like floundering, it seemed like I could rise to that occasion. And so I would schedule people to come into my house every single day, or a phone call or something, or my husband on weekends would be home. He was a complete gem. He didn't know what was going on for me. He knew he lost his wife to massage table in the living room. Used to be a massage therapist, and now became my dark night of soul bed. And I'm thankful for all those people who, adult colored with me and just helped me go on when I didn't want to go on. Just new day would come and I didn't know how to do it, but it seemed like it happened. I got up and did stuff, you know. At least I lived. I guess I can just survive. I survived and lived. And then I don't know why. Maybe all the therapy had lightened the load somehow. But I remember one day I laid down, and for the first time, I felt a little more calm than I did before I had laid down. Like it was like really a night and day thing. I go, wow, I relaxed a little. Relaxing was not something I knew. I mean, I did not remember. I longed. I remember seeing myself in a chair sitting there calm, but that wasn't my experience. But it happened one day, and then very slowly, my nervous system started to calm down a bit, regulate. And from that, some of the health challenges that happened and a lot of things just started to get a little better really slowly. And that's been about 5 years now. So things have kind of calmed down. And I had a dream, you know, that I was pregnant with my own self. I mean, that I was pregnant. I knew I was pregnant with my own self for some reason. And then at a certain point, I realized that I had been birthed and I'm now out of the womb. And I was born now of a spirit of a different kind. I wasn't the same girl who laid down before the nap. I was now this little baby learning how to do life again, and how to walk and how to be who I was, what music I could start to listen to, just, you know, and started to get really the sense of God and presence of God and downloads from God, and, you know, things lifted again. And like the joy of the Lord, the joy of my being started to come on board. For that time, I couldn't put two pleasant thoughts together. Honestly, I saw so much of my shadow side. I saw that I didn't want anybody else to be happy because I wasn't happy. I saw a lot of stuff in me that was really hard to face. Before the nap, God had maneuvered me to a place, a checkmate place, that all my protector parts, the eating, everything was done. For some reason, I knew it was over, and it wasn't really an act that I did, because as I spoke, it was clear I couldn't do that. But it did happen. God took the compulsion, the addiction, the desire to want to hold back life from me. It sort of just left, and I don't know why, but that's when Kundalini just rushed in and go, okay, I wanted you here forever. Now let's get to it, you know? And he did. It was thorough. It was deep. It was awful.
Incredible. Seems like that difficult period, I mean, to put it mildly, difficult period, but that dark night of the soul was like the birth canal. And there was a rebirth that took place there. I can relate as well. I didn't have such a long, drawn out dark night, but mine was about 2 months of very intense, similar things to what you described, intense purging and fight or flight. I think there was one point I had, like, I recognized I was having an adrenaline rush for about like 2, 3 days straight, and like heart racing, sweating, the full thing for 2, 3 days. It was really freaky. But there was glimmers of hope towards the end, like you described. Whoa, I'm relaxing. I thought, oh, okay, there's something is happening here. I'm healing. There's like a light. So then hope came about, and that was what I clung to, that, you know, with everything I had, you know, maybe what these people that I read about, Craig Holiday, for example, others, maybe what they've talked about, how it's going to be okay. Maybe they're telling the truth. it seems like something is emerging here. Maybe they were telling the truth. And I held on to that for, for dear life, I guess I could say. And eventually, like you, there was a rebirth process that, being reborn and having to look at things for the first time with a new set of eyes. Incredible, incredible. So throughout your journey, you've been describing relating with God. I think often you've described God as a man, as a he, as a masculine force. I'm curious if you relate with the divine feminine, if that's part of the way that you relate with the divine. Do you have a conception of the divine mother and that sort of thing?
Um, yeah, and sorry about the God as a he, because it's just kind of a word. I don't see it as a gender so much, but I think just my upbringing, right? You know,
Of course, nothing to be apologetic about.
yeah,
Um,
but
mhm.
um, yeah, since I understood this Shakti stuff, yeah, it's quite big in me. Like this whole feminine aspect of God, I feel was one of the huge things that God birthed in me. Just feeling the divine feminine, my own self, in how I create and how I dance, how I love, how I nurture, um, how I call out to my mom, my divine mama. you know um I feel that I feel more this nurturing side, um from spirit. I see that, and I think it's really, really beautiful. Yeah, to discover kind of the Shakti side of it, the movement, the action, part of it. So yeah, that's something that's definitely changed.
Right, right. Yeah, I also I mean for me, I'm not like my disposition, my energetic disposition is not very feminine. And I think that's why I relate with the goddess very much. Like I'll refer to God as like the divine mother. I don't really conceive of God as a he or a him, as a masculine force, though I completely acknowledge, like, for example, Shiva. I mean, I chant Om Namah Shivaya, and I enjoy those teachings. And even when you're speaking of God as like, a he, I understand what you mean. But for me, I just feel that complementary energy of the divine feminine. And I was just curious because, of course, for you, like, the feminine is very radiant in you, and you were also describing singing and dancing and music, and so I was just curious about that. Even the way that you were talking about, nurturing and supporting others, it's a very
Yeah.
feminine quality. And I was curious if there was a feminine aspect to your relationship with God. So thanks for sharing about that. I really appreciate that. So your story is a great example in and of itself of going through the process, the difficulty and multiple phases of your journey, the letting go, the transitions, the just innocent trust, and just saying, this is what God wants and God will take care of it, and it's all just going to be okay. Um, and I really appreciate that. I think the overall teaching that I'm getting from what you're sharing there is, it's all going to be okay because it's all God's play. It's God's gig. I love that the poetry of that. It's God's gig. Now, beyond that, though, however, I'm just curious for those in a dark place right now, maybe as a result of their Kundalini or their spiritual process. Do you have any general wisdom that you can share? Some of that, like I was speaking earlier about that, soothing or gentle wisdom to those in a dark place who maybe don't feel that God is present with them, or that this has anything to do with God. Because often in the dark night, there can be a sense of being abandoned by God. I'm not sure if you really felt that. You didn't touch on it too much,
I
but
did. Yeah.
yeah, okay, you did. Right. So how did you navigate? Was it just, I guess you
I
described blind faith?
lived.
You just lived. Yeah.
I just endured. I just didn't patiently, I don't know, patiently or not. I just endured blindly. Didn't know um what happened. I mean, like I say, it was total. So, if someone came to my door in that state with a dark night, I'll just hold them. I just told him, the word compassion, its roots means to be with. I know now how to be with someone, I think in a worst case scenario, hugely, and I would be with them and I would listen to them. I'd cry with them. I would whisper any words of encouragement that, that I love you, that there's more. This isn't the end run. You will survive this. And you will even see differently and clearer because of it, that you're being awakened to a higher consciousness that will help not only you, but the whole, uplift the whole. You will be ushering in a whole new consciousness. And just to kind of help them take a step back, right? The broader picture, the bigger picture here of evolution of what's really happening, but I would sit with their human side. And as long as they needed it, I would sit with them. And like with when lightning strikes, when someone's there, I feel such this motherly love and tenderness that I want to portray to them and encourage them. Like that's just so huge, The values that I have now, like friendships, a really big value to me. Like friendship's a really Aquarian, new age thing. It like brotherly kindness, friendship. That's really big in my book. Being vulnerable is very big in my book. Being authentic. I look at these as sort of the end run of what Kundalini is doing when Shakti meets Shiva. That we're reuniting. With what was once original. The word authenticity in its root means author. What was original to us, that we can live that in form, by brotherly kindness. Some of these higher mind, higher capacities within us, we maybe don't always think that they could be basic, ordinary things. Like kindness, right? I want to live in a culture, an advanced culture that has that as its king, And I feel that Kundalini, accelerates this divine process with the end run that's really beautiful. That's what I see.
Great. Well, thank you. Thank you so much for those soothing words. Sometimes people will reach out with some feedback about these conversations, and they will share that, they feel that they're in the company of people who understand what they're going through. And the message you just shared there, I think that's going to pierce some hearts, and they're going to feel your aloha. I think that's very powerful. So thank you so much for sharing your wisdom, your journey with us today, Tawni. I really, really appreciate this. It's been a great journey so far, traveling with you, spending time with you on the When Lightning Strikes community, and I look forward to staying in touch. And I'm really grateful to have you as a friend and fellow traveler on the path here. Thank you, thank you. So as we wrap up here, is there somewhere where people can reach out to you by email if they'd like to, maybe just say thank you, or, just relate a little bit about their journey? Can I put your email in the description?
Yeah, absolutely. If someone feels that they need a listening ear, a loving touch. Um, yeah, I'm totally available for hearing that. And um, if I could just share the words to a song that I clung to in the dark night, and it's called it goes like, best songs come from broken hearts, busted dreams, and beat up guitars. It's times like these when we're down on our knees, it's true. You gotta dig deep within the well of your soul to find the will to sing the song that only you know, about going to hell and living to tell the truth.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you so much, Tawni. Really appreciate that a lot. I think that's a great point for us to wrap up here. Thank you all out there for listening and spending time with Tawni and I together. We really appreciate your attention. And until next time, much love and peace.